Right now, somewhere in Panama, a ship the length of 3 football fields is climbing a hill, not sailing around one, climbing it. The water beneath the hull is rising, lifting 80,000 tons of steel and cargo 26 meters into the air, up and over the spine of an entire continent. On the far side, it will sink back down a staircase of water and slide out into a completely different ocean. The whole crossing takes about 10 hours. The voyage it replaces takes 2 weeks and goes around the bottom of the world. We treat this as ordinary now. 14,000 ships a year do it without a second thought. But the canal that makes it possible was, for a generation, the most expensive and most lethal construction project on Earth. The first people who tried to build it did not just fail. They died, by the tens of thousands. This is the story of how the impossible shortcut finally got built, and what it actually cost. To understand why anyone would attempt this, you have to understand the problem it solved. Look at a map of the Americas. The Atlantic and the Pacific run almost the entire length of 2 continents, side by side, and they never touch. For 400 years, a ship leaving New York for San Francisco had only one real option: sail south, all the way south, around Cape Horn, the jagged tip of South America where 2 oceans collide in some of the most violent water on the planet. Captains called it the sailor's graveyard. The trip was 13,000 kilometers longer than it needed to be, and it killed men routinely. And yet at the narrowest point of Central America, the 2 oceans come within about 80 kilometers of each other. 80 kilometers. A line you could walk in a couple of days. The dream was simple and obvious and centuries old. Cut through that thin strip of land and you shorten the world. The Spanish thought about it in the 1500s. They decided it was impossible, and for 300 years they were right. If you find stories of impossible builds as interesting as I do, take a second to subscribe. It genuinely helps. Because in 1881, one man decided the impossible was simply behind schedule. His name was Ferdinand de Lesseps, and he was, at that moment, the most celebrated builder alive. A decade earlier, he had done something everyone said couldn't be done. He had cut a canal through the Egyptian desert and joined the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. The Suez Canal. It made him a national hero of France and a legend across the world. So when de Lesseps turned his attention to Panama, people didn't ask whether he could do it. They asked how soon. He raised money the way a celebrity raises money, on his name. Hundreds of thousands of ordinary French citizens, shopkeepers and widows and clerks, bought shares in his company. They trusted the great man. And the great man made a fateful decision. Suez had been dug through flat, dry sand at sea level, no locks, just a straight cut from one sea to the other. De Lesseps decided Panama would be the same. A sea-level canal. Slice straight through the isthmus and let the oceans flow together. It was elegant, it was simple. It was exactly what had worked before. But Panama was not Egypt. Egypt was a desert. Panama was a mountainous jungle that received more than 3 meters of rain a year, crossed by a wild river and crawling with diseases no one yet understood. De Lesseps had never set foot there in the rainy season. He was certain anyway. The first crews arrived full of confidence. The jungle went to work on them immediately. It started with the rain. Half the year, Panama is a downpour. Warm sheets of water that turn dirt into soup and make digging a fight against the ground refilling itself. Then there was the Chagres, a river that ran straight across the planned route and could rise 10 meters in a single night, drowning equipment sweeping away whole sections of work. The steam shovels they shipped from Europe were the wrong design for the terrain. They sank in the mud, they rusted in the wet, but the machines were not the worst of it. The men were dying, they came down with raging fevers, turned yellow, vomited black and died within days. Others shook with chills, burned up, recovered, then relapsed and died slowly. Yellow fever and malaria. The French had no idea what caused either one. The leading theory of the age blamed bad air, foul vapors rising from the swamp. So they did everything wrong. They put the legs of hospital beds in bowls of water to keep ants away, and unknowingly created perfect breeding pools for the mosquitoes that were actually killing everyone. The hospitals became death traps. Workers learned that a posting to Panama might be a death sentence, and still the company kept sending them, by the thousands, into a place that was quietly consuming them faster than they could dig. By 1889, the dream was dead. The numbers tell the first half of the story. The French had spent the equivalent of billions of dollars. They had moved a fraction of the earth required, and the death toll had climbed past 22,000 people. 22,000. An entire town's worth of human beings, buried in the jungle, for a canal that did not exist. The company ran out of money and collapsed. And when it collapsed, it took 800,000 French investors down with it, the shopkeepers and widows and clerks who had trusted the great man's name. Their savings simply vanished. Then came the second blow. Investigators discovered the company had been bribing politicians and newspapers to keep the money flowing long after the leadership knew the project was doomed. It became the Panama Affair, one of the largest financial and political scandals of the 19th century. Ministers were charged. De Lesseps, the hero of Suez, was convicted of fraud. He was an old man by then, broken and confused, and he died not long after. His name now attached to the greatest failure of the age. And in Panama, the jungle simply took it all back. The trenches filled with water. Vines climbed over the silent steam shovels. The graves outnumbered the kilometers dug. For more than a decade, that was the lesson of Panama. It could not be done. And then a new empire decided to try. The new empire was the United States, and the man driving it was President Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt wanted a canal the way few leaders have ever wanted anything. To him, it was about power, a navy that could move between two oceans in days instead of months, an America that sat at the center of world trade. There was just one problem. The land he wanted belonged to Colombia, and Colombia said no. So Roosevelt found another way. In 1903, a revolution conveniently broke out in the province of Panama. The rebels wanted independence from Colombia. Roosevelt sent American warships to make sure Colombia couldn't stop them. Within days, Panama was a new country, and within weeks, that grateful new country signed a treaty handing the United States a strip of land across its middle forever. It was raw imperial muscle, and Roosevelt never pretended otherwise. He later boasted, in effect, that he took the canal zone and let the debates happen afterward. The Americans bought what was left of the French effort, the rusting equipment, the surveys, the railroad, for $40 million. And then they marched into the exact same jungle that had just killed 22,000 people. They had the money, they had the political will, they had better machines on the way. But none of that addressed the thing that had actually defeated France. The jungle was still deadly, and no amount of American confidence had figured out why. Here is where the story turns, and it turns on a man most people have never heard of. His name was William Gorgas, and he was an army doctor. Gorgas believed something that, just a few years earlier, would have sounded insane. He believed the killers weren't bad air, or the climate, or the moral weakness of the workers. He believed the killers were mosquitoes. The idea came from a Cuban doctor named Carlos Finley and was proven by American Army researchers in Havana. Yellow fever was spread by one specific kind of mosquito, and malaria by another. Not vapors, not swamp gas, insects, a bite. Gorgas had already used this knowledge to wipe yellow fever out of Havana, a city that had suffered from it for 2 centuries. So when the Canal Commission needed someone to handle health in Panama, he was the obvious choice. And then the commission almost threw the whole thing away, because most of the men in charge thought Gorgas was a crank. The mosquito theory was new, it was strange, and it asked them to spend enormous sums fighting bugs instead of digging a canal. One senior official reportedly told him the idea was nonsense, that spending money on mosquito netting and fumigation was a waste. They starved his department of funding and supplies. Gorgas watched, helpless, as the death rate began to climb all over again, exactly as it had for the French. The canal was about to fail for the second time, and the reason was the same. Nobody believed the doctor. What saved the canal was not a machine. It was a change of mind. A new chief engineer arrived, looked at the dying men, and made a decision the bureaucrats wouldn't. He backed Gorgas completely. Suddenly, the doctor had his army and his budget, and he went to war against an insect. The campaign was relentless. Gorgas divided the cities of Panama and Colón into districts and attacked every one. Crews fumigated entire neighborhoods, sealing houses and burning sulfur and pyrethrum until the mosquitoes fell from the walls. They put wire screens on windows and beds. They drained swamps, they poured oil onto standing water. Every puddle, every cistern, every ditch, so that mosquito larvae suffocated before they could hatch. They cut grass, filled hollows, and inspected water barrels house by house, week after week. It was the largest public health operation the world had ever seen, and it worked. In 1905, yellow fever swept the isthmus one last time. By the end of that year, Gorgas had broken it. The disease that had terrorized Panama for centuries, that had helped kill 22,000 French workers, simply stopped. Yellow fever was gone from the canal zone, and malaria was driven down to a fraction of what it had been. Think about what that meant. The thing that had actually defeated France was never the rock or the river, it was the fever. And now, for the first time in 400 years, it was safe to dig. Only then could the real engineering begin. The chief engineer who had backed Gorgas was a railroad man named John Stevens, and he did something that looked, at first, like the opposite of progress. He stopped digging. Stevens understood that the French had failed partly because they obsessed over moving dirt while everything around them fell apart. So he turned the whole operation around. Before another shovelful came out of the ground, he rebuilt the railroad across the isthmus so spoil could actually be hauled away. He built real housing, clean water, kitchens and warehouses so workers could live instead of merely survive. He built the machine that would build the canal. And then Stevens forced the single most important engineering question into the open. De Lesseps had wanted a sea-level canal. Just slice through and let the oceans meet. The French had broken themselves trying. Stevens argued it was still impossible. The terrain was too high, the Chagres River too violent. Instead, he championed a radically different idea. Don't cut down to sea level at all. Lift the ships up. Build a canal with locks, giant water elevators that would raise vessels 26 meters, carry them across a high inland lake, then lower them down the other side. In 1906, after fierce debate, the United States Congress agreed. The canal would not go through the land, it would go over it, which meant they now had to do two things no one had ever done at this scale: carve a path through a mountain and tame a river. The mountain was called Culebra, and cutting through it became the hardest, most dangerous work of the entire project. This was the Continental Divide, the high spine of rock that separates the two oceans. To get the canal across, engineers had to gouge a channel straight through it, a man-made canyon 13 kilometers long and, in places, more than 90 meters deep. They did it with dynamite and steam shovels and human muscle. At its peak, the Culebra Cut was the loudest, most crowded worksite on the planet. Tens of thousands of men swarmed the canyon. Trains ran on 100 tiers of track, hauling spoil out around the clock. They detonated tons of dynamite a day. Accidents were constant. Premature blasts, runaway trains, falling rock, and then the earth fought back in a way no one had planned for. The walls of the cut, soaked by relentless rain, began to slide. Whole hillsides of mud and rock slumped down into the channel, burying weeks of work overnight, swallowing entire steam shovels. They would dig the canyon out, and the canyon would fill itself back in. A new leader took command, an army engineer named George Goethals, calm and immovable, who treated the slides not as disasters but as just more material to move. So they kept moving it. Year after year, they hauled out more than 150 million cubic meters of earth and stone, enough to bury a large city. Slowly, the cut got deeper. Slowly, the slides settled, and the impossible canyon finally held its shape. Now for the other half of the plan, and it was the boldest idea in the entire project. The Chagres River had tormented the French. It flooded, it raged, it destroyed everything. The American engineers looked at that wild river and asked a question that sounds almost absurd. What if they didn't fight it? What if they used it? Their answer was to build an enormous earthen dam across the Chagres at a place called Gatun. The dam would block the river, and the trapped water would back up and flood the entire river valley, drowning thousands of hectares of jungle and creating a vast artificial lake high above sea level. When it was finished, Gatun Lake was the largest man-made lake the world had ever seen. And here is the elegant part. That lake became the canal. A ship entering from the Atlantic would be lifted by the locks straight up into Gatun Lake, then simply sail across it, across the drowned valley, between the tops of hills that were now islands, for more than 30 kilometers before descending on the far side. The same river that had killed the French dream was now the thing that floated ships across the continent. The dam also generated the electricity that ran the whole canal. It was a complete reversal of the French logic. They had tried to conquer Panama's water. The Americans flooded a valley and let the water do the work for them. Lifting a fully loaded ship 26 meters into the air sounds like science fiction. The way they did it is almost embarrassingly simple, and that is the genius of it. The locks are giant concrete chambers, each one over 300 meters long and big enough to swallow an ocean liner. A ship sails into a chamber, and the gates close behind it. Then water is let in from the lake above, through huge tunnels in the walls and floor. The chamber fills and the ship rises with it, like a toy in a bathtub. When the water level matches the next chamber, the forward gates open and the ship moves up one more step. 3 steps up on the Atlantic side, across the lake, 3 steps down on the Pacific. Here is the detail that still astonishes engineers. There are no pumps, not one. Every drop of water that fills those locks is pulled in by gravity alone, draining down from Gatun Lake. The whole system is powered by rainfall sitting in a man-made lake. The steel gates weigh hundreds of tons each, yet they're so finely balanced they can be swung by a small motor. Little electric locomotives called mules run along the walls, keeping each ship centered as it rises. And the most remarkable part of all, much of that original machinery, installed before 1914, was still running a century later. They didn't just build a canal, they built one of the most durable machines in human history. But durability has a price, and in Panama, that price was paid in lives. Gorgas had beaten yellow fever, but Panama was still deadly work. Under American control, somewhere around 5,600 people died building the canal. From accidents, from rock slides, from pneumonia, and from the malaria that never fully went away. And it is worth being precise about who those people were. The vast majority of the labor force was not American. They were workers recruited from the Caribbean, from Barbados, Jamaica, and other West Indian islands, tens of thousands of them. They did the most dangerous jobs, in the wettest parts of the cut, for the lowest pay. And the canal zone ran on a system that made that inequality official. Workers were divided into 2 payrolls, the gold roll, paid in gold for the white American supervisors and skilled men, and the silver roll, paid in silver, for the black West Indian laborers, who did the bulk of the digging and dyeing. Separate pay, separate housing, separate everything. It was segregation written into the accounts of one of the proudest engineering feats of the age. The triumphant photographs from 1914 tend to show the engineers and the officials. They rarely show the thousands of men from the islands who moved the mountain by hand and were buried far from home. The canal is their monument too, even if history was slow to carve their names on it. By the summer of 1914, the work was finally, almost unbelievably done. On August 15, 1914, a ship called the Ancon eased into the first lock on the Atlantic side. Slowly, the water lifted her up the staircase. She crossed Gatun Lake, sailed through the Great Cut at Culebra, descended the locks on the Pacific side, and steamed out into the ocean on the far side of the continent. The crossing took about 9 hours. 400 years of dreaming. More than 30 years of digging. Nearly 30,000 dead across both the French and American attempts. And now, a ship had simply sailed from one ocean to the other, over a mountain range, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. It should have been one of the biggest news stories of the century. It wasn't. Because 2 weeks earlier, on the other side of the planet, the First World War had begun. As the Ancon made her quiet, historic transit, Europe was collapsing into the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen. The newspapers had no room for a canal. The grand opening ceremony that had been planned for years was quietly cancelled. The greatest engineering achievement of its age slipped into history almost unnoticed. On the very day the old world began to burn. The canal didn't care. It just opened for business. And it has been working ever since. For most of the 20th century, the canal and the zone around it belonged to the United States. That changed slowly, then completely. After years of treaties and tension, the United States handed full control of the canal to the nation of Panama on the last day of 1999. For the first time, the country the canal ran through actually owned it. And Panama did something with it. By 2016, the ships of the world had outgrown the original locks, so Panama built a second, larger set alongside them, wider, deeper, able to carry the giant container vessels of the modern age. Today, around 14,000 ships cross every year, carrying a huge share of global trade across a staircase of water that is now more than a century old. But step back from the cargo and the tonnage, and the real lesson of Panama is quieter than all of it. France lost because it believed the enemy was the rock and the river. It threw money and lives at the digging and never understood what was actually killing its workers. America won, in the end, not because of bigger machines, but because one stubborn doctor figured out that the real obstacle was something you could barely see. The mountain was never the hard part was understanding the problem. If a story like this makes you look at the modern world a little differently, subscribe. There are a lot more builds worth understanding.